Hey guys, how's it going? So today I want to cover on the subject of how to make a fish eat again or eat for the first time in your care. Different types of fish will stop eating for different types of reasons, and we will explore the subject today. Now, if you're new to the channel, feel free to subscribe and hit that bell button to get my latest notifications. All right, so let's begin. We will first explore the reasons why a fish would stop feeding itself. Reason number one, and most common, especially in saltwater, is when fish are caught in the wild and they're simply not used to the food that you're feeding them or trying to feed them. Most wild-caught fish have already a predetermined diet. Some fish just eat live crustaceans in the wild. Some fish graze on algae. And depending where they're from, maybe you just don't have that in your tank yet. So wild-caught fish are a little bit harder to put on domestic foods, and you will have to work a little bit harder to get them to eat what you have. It also applies to wild discus or discus in general, because sometimes discus will just refuse to eat. It's one of the fish that I really notice is the hardest one to get to eat and put on weight. Also, on the subject of discus, if you do not feed them enough, or if they're not feeding themselves enough from the food that you're feeding, they will oftentimes stunt, meaning stop growing, and that will result in a permanently not deformed, but malformed fish. So you're gonna end up with a very sickly looking discus if he manages to survive at all. So reason number two, aside the wild factor, is that some fish have internal parasites. Now, sometimes there's absolutely no other symptoms than them refusing to eat. But amongst other symptoms, depending on the parasite, if it's an internal parasite, you will oftentimes notice white feces coming out of them. And when I say white feces, it's not necessarily a small, fine white string. I'm talking about a pretty bulky white string coming out of their intestine. So very much look for white feces. Sometimes when fish are not eating, they will produce white feces, but it's a different consistency. It's much smaller in size. So look for white feces. Also look for a parasite called Calamanus that manifests itself in a red worm or several worms coming out of their anus. I'll insert a picture here. So if you see that, make sure to deworm your fish. Calamanus, the best medication for that is levamisole. Levamisole, I don't know how to say that in English. I always said it in French. Levamisole. If it's other internal parasites, I recommend Prazipro or Praziquantel. It's a very, very good dewormer. Also, it could be an external parasite, such as flukes, Chilodonella, anything that would make your fish weak and sick. By result, they will stop feeding themselves. So you have to make sure they're clear on the inside and the outside. Most sick animals will refuse to eat when they do feel sick. So it could be an internal or an external parasite that's plaguing your fish. Also, there's the temperature factor. Some or most tropical fish will slow down their metabolism if your temperature is too cold, meaning they will stop feeding as much because their digestion will be much slower. So you have to make sure that your water temperature is adequate for the type of fish you're keeping. For most tropical fish, 25 to 26 degrees Celsius is great. I think it translates in 76 to 78 Fahrenheit. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm still not very good for the conversion. I'm from Canada, so everything here is in Celsius. When it comes to discus, as I recommended in a previous video about what's the best temperature for discus, I said then it was 28. It could go up to 30 if you want to grow them out even faster. But the temperature really correlates with how quick their metabolism is. By the way, all these reef fish are wild caught and I just got them a few weeks ago, so they're very skinny and I'm trying to bulk them up by just giving them a whole raw shrimp. So yes, temperature, super important, adequate temperature for your fish. If you have goldfish and you jack up their temperature to 25 to 30 degrees, they will turn into poop machines and just fill up your tank. So make sure it's always species appropriate temperature. Now, what else can we say that they would stop feeding? Well, another thing that would keep your fish from eating is actually if they haven't eaten in a long time, or in transport, they've been stuck in transport for a very long time and their stomach is shrunk, or if they come from an abusive situation of an owner that did not feed them enough and the stomach has yet again shrunk. That will prevent them from eating properly and consuming enough calories to keep on a decent weight. So in that case, I would suggest just to feed them multiple times a day, quality foods. Okay, so many times a day and quality foods. Usually I don't recommend foods high in carbohydrates, but just for the sole purpose of making them gain weight. Sometimes fish food that contain a higher carbs to protein and fat ratio is ultimate for just making your fish gain some weight. Now, the number one foods that I recommend to get your fish to eat if they're, let's say, wild caught, is just to give them some raw seafood, okay? Like shrimps, mussels, oysters, fish flesh, calamari. Calamari is very dense in fat, so they will gain weight pretty quickly if you feed them that. Also shrimp, Atlantic and Pacific shrimps are very good for making them gain weight. It's high in cholesterol and it's very good for the fish to kickstart the metabolism. Another thing that's very popular in the aquarium hobby is to pre-soak the food in some garlic. I prefer to soak raw foods, raw meats, well, raw fish and seafood in garlic rather than pellets. It's much more efficient way. Mind you, the pellets will soak them up faster, but it will also make your water dirtier as a result of already pre-dissolved pellets. So they might not even go for it and you'll end up cleaning your tank. So it's really important to feed them raw foods soaked in garlic. If you have any internal parasite medication to administer, I suggest just to add the medication alongside the garlic in their soaked food and feed them that way. So that should really kickstart their feeding process. Also, when it comes to freshwater fish, I also recommend raw foods. Actually, instead of me telling you exactly one by one what you should feed your fish, I will just insert here the link to my raw fish food recipe that I make myself for me and my clients, which we feed pretty much everyone's tank and have great results. Side note, in saltwater, if you're feeding frozen fish food, most frozen fish foods use nitrate to preserve the frozen fish food, so it's ultimately very important to well rinse your fish food before adding it to the tank. Otherwise you'll have a high spike in nitrate and as a result the fish will feel unwell and probably stop eating. I'm sorry, my zoom wasn't good. So rinse your commercial fish foods as much as you can, or just make your own fish food out of the fish food recipe I will insert either in the link down below or here in the caption. So those are my recommendations to get your fish to eat. It's very important to really diagnose the source of the problem, what's making them stop eat. Also, I totally forgot, make sure your water quality is adequate. Make sure you don't have nitrite through the roof. Make sure it's not an ammonia spike. Also, another thing is you could just be lacking oxygen in your aquarium, and as a result, why would they eat? They feel sickly. So make sure your oxygen levels are optimal, there's good flow in the tank, No dead zones. Make sure you have a power head or a wave maker in your tank to circulate everything adequately. If you have corals that need feeding, you also need flow in order to deliver those food particles to them. Otherwise, your corals will die. So here's my top recommendations to keep your fish healthy and feeding at all time. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.